Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CJJ's webinar on Boys and Trafficking, Identifying and Serving Silent Survivors. My name is Naomi Smoot. I'm the Senior Policy Associate here at CJJ. Before we get started, I wanted to run through a few technical details. First, you'll notice that you are all in listen-only mode, meaning that you're muted and that you'll be muted throughout the webinar. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. You can ask a question in one of two ways. First, you can type your question in the questions box at any time throughout the presentation. Secondly, during Q&A, you can click the raise your hand button. I will then call on you, unmute you, and you may ask your question verbally. I ask that if you are on a cell phone that you use the questions box, as that will avoid any audio feedback. We will be recording this webinar, and the recording, PowerPoint, and additional resources will be posted on CJJ's website within 24 hours. We are very excited about today's presenters. Joining us are Meredith Dank and Tina Frundt. Meredith is a Senior Research Associate in the Justice Policy Center at the Urban Institute, where her areas of focus include the commercial sexual economy, human trafficking, teen dating violence, LGBTQ issues, and victimization. She served as principal investigator on 2 studies overseen by the U.S. Department of Justice. One estimated the size and structure of the underground commercial sex economy in the United States, and the other examined the experiences of LGBTQ youth and young men who have sex with men engaged in the commercial sex market. An expert in human trafficking, Ms. Dank has conducted research in 8 countries and took part in a White House stakeholder meeting on victim services for survivors. She has worked to identify challenges in the investigation and prosecution of state and local human trafficking cases, and to assess the evaluability of anti-trafficking programs in Cambodia, Sierra Leone, and the Philippines. She served as co-principal investigator on 3 studies overseen by the U.S. Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, as well as a DOJ project that examines the organization of forced labor trafficking and stages of victimization. Ms. Dank was also a co-principal investigator in a National Institute of Justice study that looked at how young people use technology and social media to perpetrate dating violence, stalking, and sexual harassment. Dank is the author of The Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children, and has published numerous journal articles and reports. She holds a PhD in criminal justice from John Jay College. Tina Frundt has been actively raising awareness of the commercial sexual exploitation of children, CSEC, since 2000. A high-profile national advocate on the issue of domestic sex trafficking and a survivor of CSEC, Ms. Frundt is deeply committed to helping other children and women who are living through experiences similar to her own. She's been featured on numerous national shows and publications, including the OWN Network's Our America with Lisa Ling, 3 AM Girls, which featured an undercover look into sex trafficking in Washington, D.C., the CNN Freedom Project, and Redbook magazine. In 2010, she became the first U.S. citizen to receive the Free the Slaves Freedom Award's Frederick Douglass Award, which recognizes survivors of sex trafficking who use their life and freedom to help others. In 2012, she was honored with the Norma Hodling Survivor-Centered Service Provider Award. Ms. Frundt trains law enforcement and other nonprofit groups to rescue and provide resources to victims, and is also a member of the Washington, D.C., State of Maryland, and Prince George's County Anti-Trafficking Task Force. She has testified before the U.S. Congress about her own experiences and the need for greater protection and services for trafficked persons. She is the founder and executive director of Courtney's House, which provides direct services for domestic sex trafficked youth ages 12 to 21 in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Since its inception, Courtney's House and Ms. Frundt have helped over 650 victims escape from being trafficked. And I'll turn it over now to Meredith.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Good afternoon, everybody. I do want to say that if you're tuning in, and I want to make sure that you understand that I'll be focusing on a specific study that we've been releasing several reports throughout the year on, looking specific at the experiences of LGBTQ youth, young men who have sex with men, and young women who have sex with women who engage in survival sex. So my presentation today is not going to necessarily cover labor trafficking, but focus specifically on sex trafficking. So if you want to go to the next slide. I want to go over a couple of terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation, just so we're all on the same page. When I say youth engaged in survival sex, this is a term that the young people that we interviewed used to some degree and were comfortable with how to explain their experiences and their situations. And it's essentially describes young people who exchange sex for money and or material goods, including shelter, food, drugs, etc. And it's used to reflect young people's experiences and involvement in the commercial sex market in their own terms. Again, these terms describe a behavior as opposed to labeling the youth themselves, and this is something that young people have said that they are comfortable with as far as describing their experiences. I'll also be using the term exploiter, an individual who uses tactics involving force, fraud, and coercion to control a young person's involvement in the commercial sex market. And peer facilitator, which is a peer who may or may not be engaged in survival sex themselves, but oftentimes is actually engaged, and who provides non-exploitative support to someone engaged in survival sex. So this is a young person helping another young person out who's in a oftentimes desperate situation, is not looking for any kind of monetary or other material award from that young person. It's again, peers helping peers out. So if you want to go to the next slide. A little bit about the methodology that we used. We interviewed 283 young people who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or as straight, but said that they had sex with members of the same sex in exchange for money and or material goods. And that's what the YMSM, young men who have sex with men, and young women who have sex with women, that's how the term we use for them. The criteria to be interviewed for the study was the young people who had to be between the ages of 13 to 21, and again self-identify as LGBTQ, YMSM, or YWSW, and be involved in survival sex in New York City. This study is specific to New York. However, this is not unique phenomenon to New York City, and young people, LGBTQ young people, are engaged in this throughout the country. I should say that this is also funded by the Office for Juvenile and Justice Delinquency Prevention. And we partnered with an organization called Streetwise and Safe, which is a New York City-based organization here who works with LGBTQ youth of color. And what I did was I trained a handful of young people who were part of Streetwise and Safe, who identify as LGBTQ, who for many of them have been involved in survival sex themselves, or know a large number of peers who have done it, to actually do the interviews. Because we thought that young people would feel more comfortable opening up to other young people who they could identify with and who have been through similar experiences with themselves. And that's, I attribute a large success to being able to have a decently large sample size of 283 young people on the fact that we had such a strong group of young people working with us to do the interviews. And lastly, the interviews were anonymous and confidential, so the young people would call a 1-800 number to set up the interview. They would receive a monetary incentive for speaking with us, and also receive a small incentive to recruiting other young people who met the criteria into the study. Next slide, please. So the findings. I'm going to only highlight a handful of the findings because I don't have that much time. I'm going to be highlighting findings from both the report that was released in February of this year, and then we also released the second report last week that focused specifically on their criminal justice interactions. So if you want to see the full range of findings, I do have links to the reports at the end of my slides. If you want to go to the next one. So for birthplace, 2 in 3 young people were born and were raised in New York City. And why I think this is important is when people think of New York, particularly when it comes to LGBTQ youth, they think a lot of young people are coming to New York City from other places throughout the country because it's New York, it's more accepting there, there's lots of resources. But I think what this stat highlights is that there are a lot of young people who are essentially homeless in their hometown and do not have a safety net for if they are kicked out or thrown out of their home because of their sexual identity or sexual orientation or gender identity, and they have no place to go. And I'll talk a little bit about their living situation in a couple slides, but something just to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Gender. 46% of our sample identified as male, 35% identified as female, and 11% identified as trans female, 3% identified as trans male. And then, as you can see, 2% as trans other and 3% as other, including queer questioning, androgynous, femme, gender nonconforming, and genderless. What's important about this is that this study has the largest, one of the largest number of trans girls who participated on the study specifically on this issue at 11%. And then 3%, this is the first study to really document the experiences of trans boys. So although the percentage is fairly small, it's a significant number in that, you know, we were able to, again, document the experience and needs of this very specific population. Next slide. Sexual orientation, 37% identified as bisexual, 23% identified as gay, 15% identified as lesbian, 13% identified as heterosexual. So the heterosexual percentage applies to both young men and young women who identified as straight but were having sex with members of the same sex, in addition to trans women and trans boys who identified as straight. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Next slide, please. Race, I think what is overwhelmingly sticks out about this pie chart is that 95% of the young people identified as young person of color. So 39% identified as Black, African American, 17% as Hispanic, Latino, and 33% identified with more than one race and or ethnicity, and only 5% identified as white. Education. Most youth were not currently enrolled in school at the time of the interview, although almost half had neither graduated high school nor obtained a GED, despite if they had, you know, followed the formal lines of education, given their age and where they were, they at least should have technically graduated high school. You know, there were a handful who were enrolled at a GED course at the time, but many of them said that they had dropped out, or, you know, were fairly truant through a lot of their schooling because of not feeling safe, having very unstable home lives, and, you know, school not being a big priority while there was a lot of other chaos going on in their lives. So as I alluded to before, the living situation and, you know, the percentage of young people who were born and raised in New York who were part of this study, as you can see, again, overwhelming majority of these young people were essentially homeless. 48% of the youth at the time of the interview were living in a shelter, whether it be an emergency or transitional shelter. 10% were living on the streets, so that looked like living in an abandoned building. There are quite a number of youth sleeping on the subways. When it was warm out, they were sleeping in the parks when they could. 10% were living in a friend's home, and that often looked like couch surfing. So they were bouncing from friend's home to friend's home. Sometimes they could stay for just a day or night or two. Others, they could stay a couple weeks. And then I think what's important to kind of unpack a little bit is 11% of the young people who are living with family. For some, that meant their whole lives they were living with family. They had a stable relationship with their family, and they were talking about engaging in survival sex in order to help pay the bills, in order to help support their siblings and things of that sort. But this also included young people who were at the time of the interview living with family, but when we asked them kind of what their living situation had been like over the last month, there tended to be a lot of bouncing around from shelter to friend's home to going home with strangers. And even with young people who had stable relationships with their family, in some cases apartments were just so crowded that they felt more comfortable, you know, staying on the streets a couple nights or trying to find a youth shelter bed, just to kind of have a little bit more space to themselves. Next slide, please. Age first engaged in survival sex. So as you can see, the range was from as young as 7 all the way up to 22. We did do a handful of interviews with young people who were over 21 because we wanted to be able to document their experiences since they had all started when they were under the age of 18, but also because they were still networked, and since a part of this methodology was recruiting people within their networks, and they were networked with people that were in our age range, we conducted the interview with them. So the average age of first engaging in survival sex was 17 years. I just want to explain a little bit around the younger age range, particularly 7 to 13. When we asked them how they got engaged, the younger they are, it was more typical that it was through a family member or somebody who was related to the family member. But for the vast majority who started particularly between 14 to 18, this included a lot of being kicked out of their home, thrown out of their home, again, because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, really having no way of having their basic needs met, looking for shelter, for food, for other basic necessities, and feeling that this was really their only choice. And another concern that we heard from young people as to what I think is very specific to this age range is those who were involved in the child welfare system. Many of them didn't know the full extent of what their rights were and that they could get services up to the age of 21. And so they started, thinking about what happens to me next. When they were around 16, 17, where do I go? I don't have a family to fall back on. I'm going to be, aging out of the system. I need to figure out a way I'm going to make money and support myself. Next slide, please. How young people first engaged in survival sex. 42% was through a friend or a peer, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a second. 24%, someone had approached them. Perhaps they were on the street, flying a flag, panhandling, and somebody approached them asking them if they wanted to make a little bit more money. Sometimes they were just hanging out with other young people, and people approached them that way. 18% went through their own initiative. There's definitely a narrative that we heard a lot was a sense of desperation, starvation, not knowing where to go, seeing other people do this, or even just getting the idea themselves and kind of figuring out how they could be making money by engaging in survival sex. And 6% got initially recruited through an exploiter. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a couple slides from now. But with the friends or peers, this goes back to what ultimately looked like a more of a peer facilitator or friend facilitator situation, where young people who were also living in a shelter on the streets helped other young people that they were meeting to figure out ways to feed themselves, clothe themselves, find shelter. And we're not looking for anything in return in showing them how to do this. But this also included a small percentage of young people initially identified as a friend, but who ended up working for an exploiter, and so that recruitment process happens that way. The way we coded this was how that young person initially expressed what that relationship was like for them, which is how it got coded into the friends piece. Next slide. I'm just going to go over, I don't have that many quotes just because of time, but I do want to kind of give you a little bit of context to what some of these young people are going through and how they, in their own experience, explain it, or in their own words, explain their experiences. For this young man, I don't remember it that vividly. All I know that I was starving, and I think the starving piece is I can't stress enough how many times we heard young people talk about literally starving, and this is New York City. Food is on every corner. But, they just don't know how to access it. They don't know where to go. And we even had young people come in to be interviewed who had not eaten in the last 24 to 48 hours, always making sure we had food on hand for them. But I think that food and food insecurity is a huge driver for these young people. Next slide, please. For this young male, I thought it was important to highlight a quote from a young man who didn't identify as gay or bisexual, who identified as straight, and kind of highlight what that experience was like. So for him, his mother had kicked him out, so he was staying with a friend, and this person was paying everything for him. He was meeting his financial needs, and this man essentially propositioned him and said if he wants to continue receiving these things, he's going to, have to provide sex acts to him. And in this young man's, mind, he had a girlfriend. His girlfriend was pregnant. So as he said, I figured I'm sacrificing myself, my body for somebody else. I felt like I was doing a good thing. And that's, I should say, a theme for the young men who have sex with men. We did hear that because of girlfriends, children that they had, or even family members, that this is something that they felt that they would be doing to help their family out. And again, this was this sense of sacrifice as a result. What young people receive in exchange for a sex act, it ranged. These were not mutually exclusive, so it could have been any number of these categories. An overwhelming 88% received money of some sort. Sometimes that was as little as $2.25 to get on, to get a subway fare. And sometimes it was up to several $100s. It really depended on the young person's need at that time. And sometimes, again, that was just for a subway fare or even to get a piece of pizza. 29% exchanged for shelter. As many of us who live in cold weathered places, we've had some brutal winters over the last couple of years. And young people had mentioned that particularly in the wintertime, this was a huge driving motivation, was just to be somewhere warm and to be able to access a shower of some sort. 19% traded for food, 13% traded for drugs, and you can see the list goes on. Next slide, please. So I know I'd mentioned in the earlier slide about how young people get involved in this, and 6% initially got involved through an exploiter. However, I think it's really important to understand that young people's experiences change over time. So when we looked at the full, the full set of experiences of these young people that we interviewed, we found that close to 15% had been in a situation an exploitative situation involving an exploiter or trafficker. So there was force, fraud, or coercion involved. So how a young person first enters into this is not going to be the sum total of their experience throughout. It changes. It could change in a day. It could change in a week. It could change over several years. But this is why it's really important to try and get the full story from young people as to what it's been like since they've first started, they were first engaged in this, so that you can better serve their needs. And although we found in our sample that girls were more likely to be in a exploitative situation, we did interview a number of trans girls, boys, and even trans boys who'd been in an exploitative situation. And one story in particular that sticks out of mind is one young male who actually identified as straight at the time of the interview, previously had identified as gay, got involved with somebody, a trafficker, after he was kicked out of his home because he wasn't found in bed with another man. And he got involved with this pimp that he had met up in Harlem, and as a form of punishment, if he didn't make a certain amount of money, he would put out cigarettes on this young man's arm. And he, so I think, again, making sure that you understand that this could happen to any young person and any young person could experience this is really important. Next slide. Feelings about trading sex oftentimes can be complicated. If you go to the next slide. And I think this quote really highlights the complexities around why young people engage in this, some potential secondary gains, but why it's also really difficult to stop doing this. So for this young man, they saw some positive things about trading sex. You can trade sex for the life of your kids. You can trade sex to keep your apartment. You can trade sex to feed yourself. Some people think that the sex trade is the worst thing you could do because you're selling yourself. But when it boils down to it, if you have no food in your stomach, if you have no transportation, if you have a man in your face willing to give you money for a half hour, you put your pride to the side, you throw everything out the window, forget who you are, forget what you're doing, and you learn to be someone else. And for this young man in particular, who had a twin sister, they were abandoned by their mother at the age of 15. The mother wanted to live in Puerto Rico, wanted to keep her public housing in New York, left him behind with no ways of surviving. So both him and his sister started doing this at the age of 15, had experiences where they were stopped by police, lied about their age, and as I'll talk about in the next set of slides, lied about their age, said that they were 18 because they didn't want child welfare to be called and swept into the child welfare system. And so young people had said, and a number of young people said that they'd rather go through the criminal justice system than the child welfare system because they felt that the child welfare system was something that was going to be, around in their lives for a long time, where they could cycle in and out of the criminal justice system a lot easier. Next slide, please. So 67% of the youth reported wanting to stop at some point in engaging in survival sex, 5% said immediately, many of them saying they just don't know how that would be possible. They didn't know, how they would get their needs met. They would know where they were going to be sleeping, how they were going to feed themselves. And so the desire was there. They just really couldn't see the bigger picture as to how they might be able to accomplish that. 21% said they'd already stopped, although many of those young people said that this is something that they felt they could fall back on if times got really tough and they needed money again. And then 7% said they had no desire to stop at that time. Next slide, please. Just quickly, this desire to stop engaging in survival sex, this young man said, I just need my own apartment and stuff. I need a stable job, employment being a huge issue and a huge barrier for these young people. I mean, for him, he said he would even take a job at Burger King if it meant he could pay his bills and, have a little apartment and be able to just live his life. Next slide. So now I want to specifically talk a little bit about the criminal justice involvement and what these young people are experiencing, which they have stated is it's not only driving them into first engaging in this, but also perpetuating the need for them to continue engaging in survival sex because, again, the barriers that the criminal justice system creates with getting employment, housing, education, stability, and those sorts of things. Next slide, please. So over 2/3 of the young people we interviewed had reported having had a run-in, so many times looking like a stop, question, and or frisk experience with law enforcement. I think what's really important is the 19% that happened frequently, so a couple times per week, and in some cases even daily for these young people. So there's constant interactions with law enforcement with this population. Next slide, please. And I will say that young men, and young men of color, given the overwhelming number of young men of color in our sample, were the more likely to experience interactions with the police. This young man's experience was literally every day having interaction with police. Try to sleeping on the plane, he wakes up to police, try to sleep in abandoned buildings, wake up to police, out down the street, police walk up to him. He's saying ever since he was young, he was 14, these were daily interactions have occurred for him. Next slide, please. Yeah, 4 minutes. Okay, so there are positive interactions that young people have as well. I don't want to say they're all negative, as this young person had stated. They can have police who come up to them, and it really was dependent on personality. That's what we heard from a lot of young people. There were good cops out there, and they were grateful for the help that they got from those cops when they actually were able to interact with them. Next slide, please. So number of arrests, the important thing here is that over 70% of young people have been arrested at least one time in their lives, 9%, 11 or more times. Next slide, please. The frequency of arrests, this young woman, she said over 75 times she's been arrested ever since she was 12 years. So I think that's really, again, just shows you what large presence the criminal justice system has in these young people's lives. Next slide, please. Arrest charges, really important stats that I want to highlight here is that 9% of young people who were arrested on prostitution-related charges, all the young people we interviewed were engaging in survival sex. So if we are only looking at young people who are arrested on prostitution charges as potential victims of trafficking, then we're going to be missing such a large number of young people who are engaging in this. Many of them being arrested on quality of life crimes and misdemeanors. The one that I really like to highlight is 22% of young people were arrested on jumping the turnstile, which is essentially subway fare evasion, because they weren't able to pay the initial $2.75 it is now, and they certainly weren't able to pay the $50 fine. So bench warrants were out, went out for their arrests, and this is the cycle for a lot of young people. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through these. The slides will be up, and I know I'm running out of time, so I've just asked if we skip through the quotes. I apologize. Just a couple of things I want to highlight about child welfare experiences. Although this study didn't focus specifically on child welfare, it was focused on the juvenile and criminal juvenile and criminal justice system experiences. They did self-disclose some experiences they had with child welfare, and for many young people, they were negative experiences. You know, I think there needs to be a lot more funding around research around this to kind of get at that a little bit more, what these experiences look like. But these quotes that are going to be in the PowerPoint that will be posted will kind of give you a sense of what those experiences are like. Next slide, please. We can go to the next slide. So just some recommendations, and I'm happy to go over these more in the Q&A. You know, I think what's really important is developing accessible street-based and comprehensive drop-in services. And these need to be voluntary and low threshold, so young people can just walk into anywhere and access whatever services are available through that provider. Young people talked about how sometimes they go to a provider and look for example, employment training, but we're told that unless they were being diverted through the juvenile criminal justice system or diverted or recommended by child welfare, they couldn't access that particular program. So, you know, having access to all these programs and having them voluntary, I think, is really important. Improving safe and supportive short-term shelter, long-term affordable housing that's subject to periodic review. I think just having affirming spaces for young people is really important and will increase their willingness or their interest and willingness to look for help and seek out help. A lot of young people talked about just not feeling safe and felt like living on the streets or bouncing from place to place was safer than some of the shelter options and other provider options that were out there, particularly around child welfare as well. If you want to skip to the next slide. And then these recommendations get more about system recommendations. Two that I want to highlight are, you know, maybe stopping arrest-based arrests for youth engaged in the survival sex who've been trafficked. I know there's a lot of discussion around that now, particularly looking at safe harbor laws, which we do not have time to get into, but I think is important to highlight. And then I think another one that's really important to highlight is that training is very important for law enforcement across the country, particularly on how to treat and work with LGBTQ youth. But in addition to training, there needs to be transparency, there needs to be oversight, and you know, there needs to make sure that any practices and policies that are in place are actually enforced appropriately. You can see a lot more recommendations in the reports as well. So I think that's my last slide, and I will kick it over to Tina.
Well, hello, everyone. I kind of feel like I'm in a room with you all, and we're having a small conversation. So as you all some of you may have heard me speak before in train, so you know I'm really, really interactive. So what I'm going to do is kind of go through the slides and add more information for all of you all. So I need you to look at the first one. Are you ready to change your perception? Let's go back. This actually is one of our survivors drew this picture. And I think that when people see this, initially, you may go, uh-oh, why on earth did she show this? Well, this is the perception that she felt that others were saying to her and service providers, and she was also in the child welfare system. So she felt that they were saying this is a good or bad choice. If you look to the right under bad, the rest in peace, what she only saw was people dying around her and being forced into life at a very young age of five or six inside the foster care system. And then as she got and became older. So this is her perception of decisions and things people said she had to make. Let's go to the next one. Before we kind of get into what we do at Courtney's house, I want you to think about a few things. One of the things is, yes, we're based in DC, and we have a drop-in center, which is non-residential, a drop-in center that only serves survivors of sex trafficking, ages 12 to 21, really 11 to 21, and of course male, female, and the LGBT population. It's a little different at Courtney's house of what we see in the words that we use. And let's go to the next slide to understand that a little bit better. So we do street outreach. I need to explain what I mean when we say we conduct street outreach. So I'm a survivor of child sex trafficking, and one of the most important things to me was street outreach, to be quite honest. So in 2008, Courtney's House started street outreach. But before that, when I ran all the direct services program at Polaris Project, we also did street outreach. And let me tell you why we do it and why it's a little different. We have always worked with the LGBT population, always. That's what we came out with. That's what we've always done because of my own experiences. We do street outreach only on trafficking control tracks. Let me explain what a trafficking control track is. Pimp control tracks, gang control, and a transgender population. We do it a different way though. So instead of driving around in a van, we go out on the street and we walk. We pass out trinkets with our hotline number that is a for survivor by survivor national hotline, which means survivors, as you see, of sex trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault answer our hotline. So this isn't a tip line. It's a helpline. Sometimes people just call to talk for a while before they ask for help to make sure that someone is answering. Street outreach is usually done from the hours between 2 and 7 a.m. on the weekends. So that's a very different kind of time, but directly out on the street. There's a specific way to do the outreach that we do, and we do this a very different way so that we're sending a different message. Now, the first thing I'm going to say that's going to probably outrage some is tell you that I do not hand out condoms on the street. We are part of DC government's free condom program, so we have tons and cases of condoms at Courtney's House that we can give out. They get anytime they want. The reason I do not hand out on the street, here's the thing. There are a lot of organizations that go out and hand out condoms and do things for people who they define as sex workers. I wanted to send a different message of who we were and that we are here to help you get out as well. The reason why is because on the street, pimps also go get traffickers, right? And the controllers, they also get the condoms and give it. So I wanted a different message. Everything I do is actually a message to the survivors on the street. Now, that may sound odd to you, but it works because when people call the hotline, one of the things that they say is that they actually ask if a survivor, in their terminology, is running the organization or did someone help them, because it's a certain way that we do it so they can understand we do. Street outreach is very important. I think the popular misconception is that everything has moved online and nothing is on the street anymore at all. And that's just not how buyers think. So that's actually not the case at all. There's a specific way to do it. So because of that interaction, the word on the street and in the LGBT community is that Courtney's House helps you get out the light. That's what they say. That's what they say when we talk to them. Those are the terminologies that they use for us because of the unique way we do things. Now, our support groups that we have every other Saturday are focused on transitioning your mindset out of the light for all our populations. At Courtney House, we do not kind of separate services out for one gender to another. We don't do that. So everything that we provide for one gender is everything we provide for everybody at Courtney's House. Let's go to the next slide. We used to do, right now because of funding, we're not doing the parent intensive case management because there are a lot of parents who actively look for their children and call our hotline for support. And our mentoring and tutoring programs are quite different. They're different because at Courtney's House, survivors have a real voice, and a real voice means this. After everyone goes through all of our training and volunteers go through that, they actually have to submit a 2-minute YouTube clip, and they have to pitch themselves on why survivors should pick them to become a mentor or a tutor. I think that it's really hard growing up when people told me who my mentor would be, I never went, and who my tutor would be, I never went. I didn't have a say in it. So I should have a say and be able to pick so I can have a connection. So again, we just try to look at things in a very different way. At the drop-in center also is different. We have a full food program at Courtney's House, so we do provide food all the time, full cooked meals that they can take home or take where they're living or take where they're staying with them. They can feed other people with it. I don't care, just as long as they're able to get food. We always have food at every support group as well. We have snacks to give out, and I'm kind of like Big Mama where I feed you to death anyway and make sure all your friends have food. So we're always making sure that that need is also taken care of. Let's go to the next slide. So there are 4 dynamics of control, right? And this is really on a national level. There's pimp control, gang control, family control, and boy/transgender. So I put these in these categories for a reason. Each one is in a category because there's a different way you enter, a different language, a different way that you have to work. It is a different buyer population. It's different. So most of our survivors were in pimp control or gang control, or they came out of pimp and went into gang. You come out of family control, go into pimp. Each one, you go back and forth of being in the life because they all look very differently. So when people talk about like a curriculum and a model and who should we talk to about preventive, you should actually include survivors in that because each dynamic of control looks different for us. So what I believe Meredith was saying about what some of the survivors are saying during the study is like, yeah, someone asked me to do this, right, but see, what you say is, I'm not going to work anymore, right? But if I'll do this a different way, I won't get arrested. So that means you go into a different control mechanism or you hang out with people in gangs, or you try to do it on your own in quotation marks. Next one. So this one is basically for you. I'm going to explain a few things about the boys and terminology at Courtney's house specifically that we don't use. I probably will tell my age now. So I'm going to take you back 10, 15 years ago and tell you the word we used to call girls. We did not call them sex trafficking survivors, sex trafficking victims. We didn't. I was said to be in survival sex. That's what I was labeled. I was labeled to be in survival sex. We said survival sex for girls 10, 15 years ago. It was really difficult, a very long time to be quite honest with you, to fully understand that the grown men buying sex for me were pedophiles. I didn't actually understand that at all because of the word survival sex. So at Courtney's house, we believe survival sex is if another 15-year-old was having sex with another 15-year-old to survive these hard streets out here, probably be survival sex. But if it's a grown adult buying sex for someone under the age of 18, there's a word for that. What would that word be? I want you to think about that for a minute. Because in support groups, the hardest part right now, not for girls, not like me for 10, 15 years ago, but the hardest part for our male population, our transgender population, is that they say, well, it's fine for men to buy sex from a 13-year-old if you need a place to sleep. So we talk about it on that end of how it's wrong for men, not you, not the person that's going through it. It's wrong for a man to buy sex from a child, and for us to say that it's survival sex for them to have a place to live. As an adult, we're supposed to be providing that place to live and services so that doesn't happen and making sure. So right now online, there are tons of websites that cater to boys. And those are men who are actually putting ads out and saying, hey, you need a place to survive, because now they have a word. And it's not pedophile, it's not pedophilia, it is survival sex. So we try to stay away from that word at Courtney's house. You all may feel differently. That's just how we feel personally, and that's how I personally feel about the word and how long it took for me to understand that. With that being said, next slide. I'm going to skip over because I want to go into depth with the, what forms the sex trafficking. You all can look at that. In my time, I want to kind of give you some real things and things to look at in your programs and how to engage males. Go again, next one. Who's pulling the strings? I want you to also think about as we go through the next slides and talk about the male population. I'm going to leave it right here, but we're going to get to boys so I can explain a little bit on the boys' side. So, as Meredith said in her slides, there are many ways that survivors get into the life, and we're going to start with the male population. There's many ways they get in. There's also a way of buyers. So we've had a 15-year-old boy. He originally started his sex trafficking situation, actually started inside the home. Very similar to what Meredith is saying, actually about 80% to 90% of all of our male population were in child and family services. They entered child and family services because of sexual abuse. It came in under sexual abuse, right? However, in talking with them more, it was sex trafficking. So either they were being abused and then sold by mom's boyfriend, family member, a grandmother as well. And then later, maybe later they defined as gay, and they were kicked out the home. And when they were kicked out the home, and I'll use the story of one of our 15-year-olds at the time, it was his mother's boyfriend who was abusing him and also selling him to his friends. So when he came out and defined as gay, the mother's boyfriend put him out the house. He said he was walking down the street, and it was about 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. He didn't know where he was going to sleep. A man approached and offered him a place to stay, that he can stay over his house. He can give him something to eat. He went and got him something to eat. He took him back to his house. And then that's when he said, I will give you money if you do this. So he did. He dropped him back off at the transgender track to work. So the stroll or the track to work. And so then within doing that, then other members came over to him, right, and said, hey, you can live with us. You can live at our house. You can work with us. So there are different kind of ways and forms. So that can be one way. Let's go down. We're going to go backwards. So let's skip a couple slides so I can go to the boys and talk about it. No, I'm sorry. Skip forward. One more. There we go. There's a few ways that we're seeing in our area and a couple of our cases. So I just put a couple things that we saw just to think about. And I'm going to, of course, start backwards. So I'm going to start at the bottom of, have you ever worked chat lines? So a lot of our boys also work the chat lines. So chat lines at 12 and 13 and 14 is when you call those numbers at night that you see when you can't sleep. And they say, hey, call me, 1-800. So you call those. You only get about 2 to 3 minutes, about 2 to 3 minutes free. So when you call it, there are men on there who are grown men, and they immediately actually ask you your age. And the younger you are, so people will say 12 or 13, maybe they lie about their age too, but they'll say 12 and 13 years old. They quickly throw their phone numbers, and that's how buyers also find the younger boys as well as on the chat lines. Chat lines can't really be monitored. I mean, you can, but they route so much to different numbers, it's very hard to monitor those. So we were seeing actually a lot of that with our male population. Dance crews. So I think about a year ago, I got a call for the Juvenile Detention Center. And there was a 14-year-old boy that asked me to come and talk to him. So when I get there, the first thing he said, it was just the sweetest thing ever. And he was originally from North Carolina. So he was telling me, you know, I got arrested. And I said, what street did you get arrested on? And he said 5th and K, which is a transgender track. And I said, well, how'd you even know how long you've been here? He's like, no, I wanted to see the White House. He's like, what street? You know, wasn't the White House near me? So I quickly found out he had only been in D.C. maybe a day and a half and got arrested. Now, how did he get from North Carolina down to D.C.? Well, he was in Child and Family Services as well. He had a foster parent, and he answered an ad at the mall. There were flyers all around the mall to join the dance crew. And so his foster parent actually signed the form for him to join the dance crew. And he was really excited. He auditioned. And when they went and left the state to dance, they were only dancing in male strip clubs and private parties. And then they were taking them all down to also work the stroll and the tracks in each cities that they were taken to. So there are lots of different ways, and we just want to give you some wide range of what we're kind of seeing. So that is one way. So then I started to see an increase in that of dance crews happening to join a dance crew when it was trafficking. So what does that mean? It was transgender males who were older, who you call mama, right, or godmama, you all work in a house together. So House of Divas, House of Love. And you all bring in your money together. So maybe the main mama, right, or the godmama gets the money and gives you money anytime you need, buys you clothes to be fairest. But every day you pay for bills, right? So every day you're going to have to pay for food, you got to pay for rent. So what is that called? Is that a similarity for females? I just want you to think about that as we go through this. It's to help you become fierce. Fierce was that terminology that I used in there because that's what it does. It helps you become fierce and bold. That's the terminology for it. We ask always, do you have a mama that helps take care of you? This does not mean that person is trafficking them. I'm trying to create a story and figure out the whole story to the issue and how we can help. So know that our questions are asking to really understand the whole entire story that that survivor went through. What we're also seeing is that they're given hormone shots to work. So it can be a few things, right? You want to have hormone shots, but you're 14 and you're not able to access that. So maybe that will also be a reason. So instead of drugs proper, I will give you hormone shots if you do this. We were seeing that a lot in our area. In our area, we do have a gay gang, and it's called The Check It, and you'll be able to Google that, The Check It, and they have a video out. They talk more about being together and making sure that people are not abusing them in any way of the way that they define. But what we've seen a lot is that there are a lot of survivors that we work with that were forced to work in the Check It or beat up if they are not, or everyone's working on the streets and they're not part of the Check It, then they're jumped and beat up to be a part of that, and all their money taken when they're out on the street. So when we're talking about boys, I just want to ask you something again to think about when you're asking us questions. When I told you that 10, 15 years ago, we said that girls were survival sex. That's what we said, right? Today, if we said a 13-year-old was engaged in survival sex and it was grown man buying sex for a place to live, we would say, are you serious? We need to find her housing, specialized care. We need to make sure she has food, clothing, and we would jump on that right away. Why do we separate services out for the LGBT population, the LGBTQ population, and also males? Because not all of our male population define as LGBT, and I'm glad that Meredith was able to show that. So why do we do that? Why do we separate and say that one services is different? So we really just try not to separate services. Now please don't think and get out of this conversation that I think that everybody in the life is being pimped out and trafficked and beaten all day and they must get out to get help. That's not how it works with me. And so I would never think that. It is a process, and we are here for the journey and process when they see it and are ready to. If you are under the age of 18, once again, we just explained on the male side of grown men that that's not okay for grown men to buy sex from children, because we need to really learn about the pedophile position. That's really, really understanding for your transition of your mindset out of the life to understand that. So with that being said, our populations have always been the same. We always have an even mix because of that. I think the harder part is getting others, right, to see the services. So I will tell you that we have gotten police calls, and police have called us in for help, but it sounds way more like this. Hey, Tina, we have a young boy, I guess he's gay or something, or dresses like a girl, and he's engaged in survival sex. He's 14 years old. Can you talk to him? So I think I agree with the terminology and understanding what that is, and also using the right words with survivors. Let's go backwards. I asked you to skip to boys trans control, go back to gangs. Family. Oh, gang. Okay. Sorry, you did what I asked you. Now, when we think gang control, you might just think of the female population. So what we're actually starting to see a lot as well, and then we also got a referral a few months back, was for a young boy whose mom was married to an MS-13, and the young boy was being pimped out, who was 13. So we also see it that way, where boys inside of gangs are not just being used as being in the gang, but also being used as being sold, just like the females. I think that we have to understand that people don't think the way like service providers do, right? Criminals don't think the way we do. So that means that any mechanism to control someone, right, they're going to do, or any buyer mechanism. So gangs may be hanging out with gangs. You're hanging out with gangs, so you can define as gay or transgender, but then they offer you a place to stay and some money. So what we're seeing is the same thing with girls, that they go to skip parties, the same. Now, boys can be used in a couple ways in the skip parties. They either have to help rape the girls in to be in the party, or if they do define as gay, they're usually the ones that have to provide sex for the other guys in the games, but these guys in the games do identify as straight. So we're seeing that, and we're also seeing them drugged as well. It's really important that you ask, did anyone ever show you any DVDs or YouTube footages? And the reason why is because that is what they use to keep you in that situation. So they may YouTube video you. I was on my Facebook, but one of our survivors was in the drop-in center, and she showed me a video and asked me if I can help this young boy. In the video that was on Facebook that I was very upset about, it was a male who was about 14 years old, and there was a bunch of males lined up, forcing him to provide oral sex and hitting him if he didn't. And having that video and understanding, and then they were all making fun of him and calling him gay and filming it as they were forcing him to provide oral sex. And then they threw money at him at the very end of the video. They threw money. Have we created an environment where this is funny, or that we don't see why we would want to help somebody that's doing this, or we don't even see it as someone who needs help, that we're posting it all on Facebook? My question to you all is, why are services yet again so different from male, female, and the transgender community? It shouldn't be. So with that being said, all the aspects that girls are trafficked and lured in are the same ways that boys are too. 80% of our population identifies as LGBTQ. So that means our females as well. Yes, they do. And they may defined as, they may have been born that way. They may have came out of a situation and don't want to deal with males. Or at Courtney's house, our survivors created Come Out Thursdays. So Throwback Thursdays is Come Out Thursdays. So those survivors who may not be really able and want to identify every single day because they're still going through a process, they created a day. So on Thursdays, you can be who you are. I created a day at Courtney's house. Doesn't matter what you wear. Doesn't matter what you dress, what you say about it. It is a safe space. So are we creating a safe space for survivors to identify who they are and have honest conversations and using the right language where they feel comfortable with? Okay, let's go back. I think it was family. Family control. I think the hardest one for people to really pay attention to is family control. I honestly think if we did the right study, hint, hint, Meredith, we did the right study, I really feel like we will see that family control is actually more than pimp control. I really do. A lot of our survivors came through family control. I did too. Inside of the foster care system, it was family first. So you ask questions a different way. And a lot of our boys, like I told you before. So if we're in a foster care system, how do you determine that, yes, there was sexual abuse that went on, but how do you not know that it was also sex trafficking? Have you ever helped your family save money? That's a very important question. And the reason why it's a very important question is because when you are under family control, I grew up thinking that when you're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, everyone has to help out with money in some type of way. Whatever job you have, you bring your money to a plate. Now, you may say, 6, 7, what would you be able to do? But what if a family member or my foster parent is saying, yeah, you may have to sleep with men, but it's okay. This money goes back to us. It helps us. It supports us. So have you ever helped your family save money? Because that's how it's presented to you. What are some ways you help? So that's how we get to know more of the information. What are some ways that you help? Has anyone in your family ever dropped you off at someone's house? Very important question. So remember, again, we talked about our boys and not being able to determine inside the foster care if they were sex trafficked. All of the boys were dropped off at a family's or someone else's house. So someone that they called uncle, right? Usually a buyer, but your family tells you to call them uncle. And you have maybe been dropped off for an hour, 2 hours a day, a weekend, and told to do whatever they asked you to do to help out. How long were you gone? It gives you a little bit more information and background to that. Can you go to pimp control? I think when we think about pimp control, go to after this one. I think when we think about pimp control, you only think about females. So recently in the news, there was a man who had a house, and he had pimped out all these boys and got them to work and kept them on drugs. I think we separate out of what we've heard and known for females. There are lots of different situations. Maybe remember when I asked you to keep in mind about the house of something that you stay and live in, and they say that you live in a house. And in that house, you pay money every day because I'm going to buy you things. And I'll buy you things. I'll make sure that you're kept fabulous all day long. What is that called? So it may not look like the traditional pimp that you're thinking, but it may have the same measures, right? That measures and looks like, but it's not the same way that we may think it is. So it may be that way. It also may be designed to look like an escort agency, because we all know escort agencies are legit, not. So with that being said, it can be lots of different ways that males are working into the system. It's the same as girls, though. And that's what I just going to keep bringing home to you all, because to me, once again, at Courtney's house, to me, my opinion, is that services shouldn't be different from one gender is another. I could care less if someone's LGBTQ, or my services are here to help you. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I have the right services for them and I make them feel at home. So with that being said, and that they know that we serve all people, and that we hear and we work with other LGBT populations and we work together so that they know we support them. I am going to say that the biggest push is housing. And not just any type of housing. It has to be specialized, and it has to be a place where survivors who identify as pansexual, transsexual, transgender can always be who they are. So advocating more for jobs as well, and the right jobs. So we don't have to keep using the excuse of, oh, they need to survive, because to me it becomes an excuse. That way we're not actually writing into the bills having jobs for the LGBT population. So kids don't have to do studies like this and say that. Next. Most of our survivors, especially in male population, have been arrested and targeted just by that conversation that I told you of getting a call of what they say. That particular officer went into detail to telling me, no, he was dressed like a girl, he had a wig and everything. That should not be a factor, and more training to understand. But I also feel like you can train somebody all day long. You can't force them to use the right terminologies. I think that sometimes people forget that they have a job to do, and your job has nothing to do with how you feel or define as someone. It's your job, right? So if it's just your job to protect, it doesn't really matter if it's transgender, transsexual, gay, it doesn't matter. It means that's your job to protect. With that being said, we do see a lot, especially with a lot of our females actually give us referrals for our boys as well. And to be real honest, I will say that our male population, our boys, do have more mental health, severe mental health issues, and very severe mental health issues. So some of our boys have schizophrenia. They are diagnosed with dual personalities, because of all the abuse that they have endured. I have a cold, so you might hear me cough a few more times. With that being said, I think it's really important to also have mental health available for all survivors as well, and partnering and making sure. Now, that's the harder aspect for our population, for both male and female, and especially because of most of my population is African American and Latino descent. So we already know the stigma behind the mental health population. Now, I really want to read the police officer oath for a reason. It says, I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will never sit here and say that all police are bad, because I don't feel that way anymore. But I think it's a good reminder, right, of reminding them that when working with clients who might identify as another gender. However, I do have survivors who do not identify as gay, who many may think because they wore a beautiful dress and a beautiful wig, that's how they define. I don't think that we should put people in the boxes for them to receive help. We should just meet them where they are and focus on what their needs are and what we should be doing for them. Next. Well, I do want to wrap up, and just to let you all know the end of our model. I want to really end this and tell you that Courtney's House to Me model is really more of Harriet Tubman's model. Harriet Tubman was a slave. Not only was she a slave, but she got herself out of slavery and went back and helped so many others. She did not say that they had to be all female, that they had to be under the age of 18, that they cared if they were LGBT, who they slept with. Her only requirement was that they were a slave. And that's what we try to uphold at Courtney's House. Our only requirement is that you need help and that we're here for you, no matter what, no matter how many times it takes and where you may fall, but we will help you get back up. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks so much, ladies. Both of you were great. I have a few questions that came in while you all were presenting, and we can take some more as well. The first question that we had come in was kind of how this relates to school systems and what schools can do and how they should apply what's been stated in today's presentation.
I could take a first stab, and Tina, you feel free to weigh in. You know, again, since this study that I did was specifically focused on LGBTQ youth, in addition to YMSM and YWSW, but primarily the young people did identify as LGBTQ. You know, one thing that we heard time and time again is just feeling safe and feeling that it's an affirming space, that if they are experiencing any kind of discrimination or harassment or issues, that they have a safe place to go and speak to somebody. I mean, one thing that is a much larger issue that we certainly cannot tackle today, and it's been brought up on many occasions, is, you know, and I'm bringing it up just because this is what we've heard from young people, is the issue also around mandatory reporting. We spoke to a number of young people who experienced abuse in the home, who felt like if they went to a counselor at the school who is a mandatory reporter, that it was immediately going to kick up a lot of child welfare involvement, potentially even law enforcement involvement, and young people would rather have a conversation, figure out exactly what the options are, and then go from there. And if it made sense to involve child welfare, great, or law enforcement, great. But that was definitely a concern that brought up as to why young people also don't necessarily go to school counselors and teachers and things of that sort for help, because the fear around mandatory reporting, which again is not something we can tackle today, but just some food for thought as to how we can maybe think about this, approaching this in the future.
And just to quickly add, we're really excited about us going into Prince George's County school system. We're currently doing a pilot program. First, I had to train all of the health teachers, because this is actually where you're able to talk about sex trafficking with the health education teachers. So we just started, and within starting, I identified 7 survivors who came to me. Well, I want to break that number down a little bit. 3 of those survivors were not survivors of sex trafficking. Because my life is interesting, and I grew up in Chicago, shout out to Chi-Town, West Side, Ida B. Well homes. With that being said, there were boys that actually was coming out to me talking about help getting out of the gangs. So that was new. But then the other population was girls who were sex trafficked. So we have been seeing, and I stay at the school all day long, so we're able to talk. So what about if the reporting is more through me, and then we can report to the Human Trafficking Task Force and get services in? So that's what we're doing. I'm going into more high schools and middle schools.
Great. Meredith, this question was for you. There was mention of specific courts for trafficking survivors that exist now in New York. At the time of your study, were those courts in place, and were some of the folks that you spoke with, did they take part in those courts, or were they excluded because they're boys, or kind of how did that play out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there was the Prostitution Diversion Court out of Queens Criminal Court that's been in place for a very long time now, and we actually did court observations. So we sat in courtrooms. There are certain days that are designated to see prostitution cases, and so we wanted to kind of see what the interactions were like between all the players and the actors that's in the courtroom. And then we also, Midtown Community Court also sees a lot of prostitution cases. So we did sit through a number of days of that. And I will say that the vast majority of people who were being seen in those courtrooms were cisgender women. There were very few trans women, and I may have seen one, at most two boys during that time. And I'm actually working on a separate project with Legal Aid Society right now, and their exploitative intervention project, to look at individuals who've gone through the criminal justice system, who've been arrested on prostitution charges, who've been actually identified as trafficking victims. And the vast majority of the cases, and Legal Aid, I think, handles 85% of all prostitution cases in New York City. And so I think they see maybe less than 5% of their clients are non-cisgender women. So the courts are just not seeing this, and I think a big primary reason for that is that boys and to some degree trans youth are just not being arrested on prostitution charges. The police are finding other things to arrest them on.
Thanks. And Tina, we had a couple questions about terminology. Could you explain some about what a skip party is?
Oh, great. Okay, so a skip party is during the day. So I'm going to go old school for a moment. Remember back in the day you had senior skip day? Not like that. It's in the daytime. So gangbangers have party in the day where you skip class. You have to bring a friend. So every girl has to bring a friend. And by the way, they also put this on Instagram. So you bring a friend, you go have this big party. Some of our girls and boys didn't drink at all, and then they woke up. So they spice everything. The sadder part is it's also an initiation process. So they usually rape the male and females and videotape that, and that's how they get them into the light.
Where could people go if they wanted to volunteer in this area or find out information about things going on in their own states?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure, I'm sorry. Where could folks go for more information if they wanted either to volunteer or to find out information about their state specifically?
So at Courtney's house, we don't move, but our model and curriculum does. We're doing a lot of things with the WIXA in Long Island, New York, and other organizations. So we can come there. You can go on our website, courtneyshouse.org. We have a volunteer page, ways we can help. And then for kind of a breakdown of your city and states, I really think Shared Hope International's website is good. Kind of breaks down what they're doing in each state as well. So those are some really good resources.
I would also recommend checking out Polaris's website, but also, I think a lot of at least the young people that I've seen and that I've interviewed as part of my research, looking at your local homeless youth shelters and seeing how you can volunteer and help out there. Because, as Tina mentioned, I think, mentoring is not something that's always funded or, well-resourced, and I think that there's some really great opportunities there, especially because so many young people say that because of employment barriers, that this is something that they're driven to doing, a lot of constrained choice around there. So even interview job skill training, is resume building, all of these things are just so helpful, and in a lot of the programs that I've worked with, they just say that it's really hard to find people who have the time and the ability to lend a hand with that.
And one last question, Meredith, this one's for you. In terms of the ages, is there a difference in the age at which boys are starting to enter the life versus girls?
With the research that I've done, and I've done a couple of different studies looking specifically at CSAC, the age range, it's not very different. The average age, I should say, is between 15 to 16 years of age. So we're not seeing huge, and again, there's obviously lower minimums and higher and things like that, but the average age is about the same. Maybe girls is a little bit younger.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone, and thank you guys for hanging in. I know we ran a little bit over. Thank you to all our presenters and for everyone for all their great questions. If you have additional questions, our emails are on the screen. So thanks, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.